These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. Nuremberg Prison, 1946. American soldiers watched each door day and night. These halls held the highest trial prisoners awaiting judgment. London wedding inside a ruined church. The roof was open to the sky, yet the vows went on. Love turned rubble into an aisle. French pocket medical kit from the early 1900s, carried for house calls and travel. Inside are sealed glass ampoules with hospital-grade anesthetic and strong pain reliever, a snapshot of early care. Indian performers in 1902 show a daring balance on a tall bamboo pole with stacked pots held steady. The troupe was part of Gustav Hagenbeck's traveling exhibit that introduced South Asian street arts to Europe. March 1959. Tibetan monks hand over arms to Chinese soldiers after the Lhasa uprising. This stark handover marked a turning point in Tibet's modern history. Majdanek near Lublin, 1944. A suitcase of children's toys lies among many bags. These quiet things are all that remain to name their owners. These iron stamps from the 19th century were used to press hot marks onto the skin of enslaved people. Each shape and letter worked like an ID that linked a person to a seller. William Saunders staged this 19th century scene in China to look like a public punishment. Western papers ran it as real, feeding stereotypes and shaping how readers saw Asia. Berlin, May 1945. The crew of an IS-2 heavy tank sits on the barrel as rows of prisoners of war pass by. Built to break strong points, the IS-2 now watches the closing act of the war. Bergen, Norway, April 1944. A harbor blast from the ship, Vorbode hurled this vessel onto the quay. The shock wave shattered the city center and left streets covered in wreckage. Street seller in Alushta in the early 1900s carries a metal pot filled with hot chebrek pies. This Crimean Tatar snack stayed crisp and warm as he walked the seaside town. Egypt, 1951. Workers uncover a royal colossus at the Temple of Nehmetawi in El Ashmunain, ancient Hermopolis. A giant face returns to the light after many silent centuries. Germany, early 1945. Rows of unfinished Heinkel. He-162 jet planes fill an underground assembly hall. This light jet used a wooden body and a single top engine so factories could save metal and build fast. Las Vegas, 1947. Neon signs crowd Highway 91 before the famous strip took shape. Small clubs and motels pulled travelers off the desert road with bright marquees. Driver certificate from the Russian Empire in the 1910s, issued by the First Warsaw School of Chauffeurs. Early drivers trained on engine care and road rules long before modern licenses. Nevadaville, Colorado, 1895. Miners rode iron buckets down a narrow shaft with small candles on their caps. They worked about 850 feet below ground in the Hubert mine for gold and silver. Smolensk region, 1943. A family steps back into their home after the front has passed. The woman carries an icon of St. Nicholas, a sign of hope many families saved through the war. New York City, 1932. A man walks on Wall Street with a sign asking for his life savings, $2,950. Before deposit insurance began in 1933, many people lost their money when banks closed. Persia, 1899. Men sit in heavy wooden stocks and chains while two guards stand watch. Public restraint like this in the Qajar era served to deter and shame, not to draw blood. 1958 in China. Crowds waved cloth and beat pots so sparrows could not land. With their predators gone, insects multiplied and the harvest fell sharply. United States, 1902. A hollow redwood so wide a horse and rider fit inside the cut. Many coast redwoods grow taller than a 30-story building and can live for 2,000 years. Hornsey, London, 1943. A mother and child sort paper, tins, and jars at a street salvage stand. Families filled these sacks so factories could remake waste into parts and tools. Pearl Street, New York, 1882. Workers lay one of the first underground power cables for Thomas Edison's new station. These lines lit nearby offices and showed how a modern city could run on wired light. In 1906, Ota Benga, a Congolese man, was shown at the Bronx Zoo beside chimpanzees. Public protest ended the exhibit, a recent echo of a troubling past. Palermo, 1895. The Capuchin catacombs show dressed mummies standing in wall niches. First made for monks, it later became a status resting place where time feels paused. Berchtesgaden, May 1945. Captain Lewis Nixon wakes beside crates of rare bottles from captured Alpine estates. His unit took several truckloads of vintage wine, a haul soldiers nicknamed the $1 Million Hangover. Chernobyl Power Plant, 1986. An ISU-152 Zveroboy knocks down a hanging block so crews can work. A gun built to crack bunkers turned into a demolition tool to make the site safer. Tail fins ruled American car design in the late 1950s, inspired by jets and rockets. By 1959, the Cadillac wore the tallest fins as brands chased style more than fuel savings. Tibetan skeleton dancers perform a cham ritual in 1925, photographed in early color by Joseph Rock. Bone masks and swift steps remind viewers that life is brief and compassion matters. Philadelphia, 1934. A cathode ray tube at the Franklin Institute shows a live face from the next room. Early sets ran on glowing vacuum tubes and needed careful tuning for a steady picture. In 1994, leaders of Russia, the United States, and Ukraine signed a deal for Ukraine to give up its atomic arsenal. In return, it received security promises known as the Budapest Memorandum. U.S. Army Video Edit Room, 1973. Racks of tape decks, patch bays, and CRT screens ran on tubes and early transistors. Editors cut training films by rolling reels and pressing buttons in exact order. Leningrad, 1990. Shoppers hand in ration coupons for sugar at a small store window. Shortages turned paper slips into daily currency for food. Tower Bridge load test in 1894. Engineers covered the deck with heavy wagons to check its strength. Only after nothing bent or cracked did London open the bridge. Belfast, 1909 to 1912. Titanic rises on the Errol gantry at Harland and Wolff, a steel city on a dock. Built by thousands of hands and about 3 million rivets, its scale turned shipbuilding into theater. German soldiers dig an experimental Maus super-heavy tank out of thick mud. Weighing about 188 tons, the giant often sank before it could move far. Gulf War, 1991. Soldiers set up a canvas decoy shaped like a Challenger tank. Cheap fakes like this misled scouts and sensors, pulling attention from real units. Early 1910s. Women build Model T cars on an open airline as parts roll past like a river. Mass production soon cut the car's price by more than half, putting wheels within reach of many families. New York, 1911. Children sit in the hollows of the Willamette meteorite, the largest found in the United States. This iron visitor weighs about 15 tons and shows deep pits made by slow weathering on Earth. Ghana, 1899. A healer stands beside charms and jars, wearing a robe covered in tools and small carvings. These objects showed his craft and were used for care and rituals. Asturias, 1925. Craftsmen sell madreñas, hand-carved wooden clogs for farm life. Each shoe stands on short pegs to lift feet above mud and rain. Thessaloniki's Byzantine sea walls still hug the water in the 1860s, a stone shield from the Middle Ages. Most sections were later removed as the city grew, so this view is a rare memory. Russia, 1927. A rural couple agrees to foster a street child, recorded by photographer Arkady Shaikat. Community drives in these years placed many children with families to rebuild lives. San Francisco, May 27, 1937. Thousands of cars rolled onto the new Golden Gate Bridge on its first public day. It was then the longest suspension span in the world, linking the city to Marin in minutes. Uzbek schoolgirls study math in Tashkent in 1921, faces covered by the paranja and horsehair chachvan. Within a few years, new rules and city life would change classroom dress across the region. New York, 1918. Women at Alexander Proper and Company sew knit garments on hand-crank machines. Homefront factories produced millions of wool items that kept soldiers warm overseas. El Paso watched Halley's Comet sweep the sky on May 16, 1910. Crowds filled the streets to stare, while rumors spread that the tail might touch the air. Scientists once thought this fish was gone since the time of the dinosaurs. In the 1950s, a rare coelacanth from the Indian Ocean proved it still lived, with limb-like fins and a jointed head. Maijishan, the Wheat Stack Mountain, holds hundreds of cliff caves carved by Buddhist monks beginning in the 4th century. Wooden walkways cling to a 142-meter wall, guiding visitors past giant stone Buddhas in the rock. Red Square, 1925. Troops march with a red banner on the 8th anniversary of the October Revolution. The young state used grand parades to shape a new identity and memory. USSR-5, 6 airship, set a world endurance mark in 1937, staying aloft for about 130 hours without landing. A year later, it was lost on a night flight in the far north, ending the program's biggest dream. Moscow engineers moved whole apartment blocks on rails, sometimes with people still inside, to make room for new streets. From the 1930s to 1983, thousands of tons slid meters at a time, while windows and lights stayed on. June 1940, a German delegation led by Adolf Hitler waits at the Compiègne rail car, the same carriage used to sign the 1918 armistice. The site was chosen to turn that memory back on France. March 9, 1945. Joseph Goebbels shakes hands with 16-year-old Willy Hübner after the fight for Louvain. A fading regime was pinning medals on boys as the war neared its end. Leningrad, winter 1942. People pull water on sleds beside a silent tram in deep cold. During the siege, homes lost heat and taps, so families cut holes in ice to fill cans. Oberhofen, February 1945. A U.S. soldier pulls a line to test an abandoned launcher from a safe distance. Troops used long cords because hidden triggers were common in left-behind gear. Alexandrovsk, 1921. Families wait outside a relief kitchen. The sign reads, "Joint subsidizes this institution." The American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee and the Red Cross fed many towns after the war. Auschwitz des Semmes, May 1944. Arrivals from Carpathian Ruthenia stand on the ramp, men to one side and women with children to the other. In minutes, officers decided who would be sent to work. most would not be seen again. London, 1944. Wardens and neighbors pass a survivor over their heads after a V-2 rocket hit a street. The silent supersonic weapon gave no warning. Only dust and teamwork filled the air. Longest hair contest, 1926. Rows of entrants show floor-length tresses on a rooftop. Winner Genevieve Slade measured about 152 centimeters, nearly 5 feet, of hair. January 1985. A Brazilian Navy sailor stands on a submarine with an FN-49 to watch for sharks while his crew swims. Sub-crews sometimes held swim calls in open sea with a lookout for safety. A royal guest takes the driver's seat of an armored carrier during British Army drills in 1988. Helmet on and radio linked, she learns how the vehicle moves over rough ground. Moscow, 1994. Officers lower bags of financial papers from the home of Sergei Mavrody's MMM. The biggest investment story of the year played out on a balcony in plain view. A 1995 video guide taught Windows 95's new Start button, taskbar, and plug-and-play with easy steps. 2 TV stars hosted it and turned computer setup into pop culture. London, September 9, 1940. A blast hurled an empty double-deck bus into a house at Harrington Square. 11 people in nearby homes lost their lives as teams searched the rubble. 1967. A tailor stands on a chair to measure Lou Alcindor, later Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who stood 218 centimeters tall. His skyhook would make him the league's top scorer for many years. USS Ranger, 1942. Deck crews run checks on F-4F-4 Wildcats before the North Africa push. The compact fighter had folding wings so the carrier could pack more planes for the long trip. New York, 1928. Mary Delroy runs an early General Electric TV transmitter at the Radio World's Fair. The spinning disc camera sent rough moving images long before home TV arrived. Stalingrad, 1943. The city center stands in ruins after liberation. Snow and smoke frame silent walls as soldiers walk through the empty streets. 1944. An M4A2 Sherman fitted with the T-10 mine exploder poses with a crewman. The huge steel rollers press the ground to trigger buried mines ahead of the tank. Russia, 1880s. Artisans hammer copper sheets into helmet halves and collars for deep-sea gear. Brass and copper were used because they resist rust and shape well by hand. 1990s Russia. A courtyard scene where police hold men face down on the ground. An older woman steps past the detained line and keeps walking. Madrid, 1914. Tram drivers and conductors warmed their hands by coal stoves between routes. Huge kettles kept tea ready so long shifts could go on through the cold. August 1936, near Madrid. Militia raised rifles at the Sacred Heart Monument on Cerro de Los Angeles, then regarded as Spain's geographic center. The statue was later rebuilt after the war. Valencia, 1960. Towering festival giants sway through Corpus Christi streets while bands echo between balconies. These papier-mâché figures date back centuries, and each neighborhood marches its own. Messines Ridge, Belgium, June 1917. 19 deep mines reshaped the hillside in a single moment. The shock was heard in London and left giant craters like this. April 24, 1945. A survivor at Buchenwald drinks quietly outside a wooden barrack. Liberation revealed a vast camp system the world had not fully seen. An early Keds ad shows canvas and rubber shoes born in 1892 from U.S. Rubber and Goodyear. The name mixed kid and peds and soon became America's go-to-gym shoe. A U.S. B-17 Flying Fortress belly-landed in a Swiss potato field in 1943, far from its mission route. Neutral Switzerland interned the crew and plane, so local kids peeked at the silent giant up close. New Fords roll off a stacked hauler to a small town dealer in 1945. After wartime limits, car deliveries like this signaled factories switching back to civilian life. This German Vomag bus ran on wood gas during fuel shortages in the 1940s. The rear unit heated wood to make a burnable gas that fed the engine. Winter 1943 near Leningrad. Troops move toward a small wood as a wrecked tail fin juts from the snow. The fallen plane shows the last sign of the enemy while the line keeps going. Dresden, February 1945. After a series of air raids, the old city lay in ruins. Much of the Baroque heart, including the Frauenkirche, was rebuilt stone by stone decades later. Bern, 1944. Volunteers harvest potatoes in front of the federal palace as part of Switzerland's cultivation battle to raise homegrown food. Cities even turned parks and lawns into vegetable plots to keep the neutral country fed. April 11, 1912. Third-class passengers walked this open stern deck during the short stop at Queenstown, the ship's last touch with land. Many travelers joined here for a new life overseas, making this quiet space one of the busiest corners of the ship. August 1941 in occupied Ukraine. A local man is tied to a post as a public warning after a reported theft. Such street penalties were used by occupying forces to enforce control. Harbin, 1934. The headquarters of the Russian Fascist Party in Japanese-controlled Manchuria glows over a club sign. The group ran papers, schools, and youth circles, but collapsed after 1945 with the end of Manchukuo Aligarh Muslim University, 1946. A zoology lecture shows women seated behind a screen while men occupy the front benches, reflecting campus customs in late British India. Founded in 1920, AMU grew into a major science hub whose labs trained many teachers and doctors after independence. Finnish figures Antti Isotalo and Antti Rananjärvi sit under heavy restraints after arrest, 1869, icons of the rowdy street culture that troubled 19th century Ostrobothnia. Their fame sparked a well-known folk song bearing their names and helped push stricter public order rules in Finland. Private Herbert Norman of the U.S. 17th Airborne Division guards a group of very young Wehrmacht conscripts who surrendered in Münster in 1945. Weeks earlier, his division had jumped in Operation Varsity, the largest single-day airborne assault of the war, helping open the way across the Rhine. June 13, 1961. Just 2 months after Vostok 1, Yuri Gagarin sets the first stone in Kaluga for the world's first museum of space exploration, dedicated to rocket pioneer Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. The museum opened later in the decade and became a landmark of global space heritage. Jesse Wilford Reno, the engineer who patented the first working escalator in 1891, tests his foldable life raft with volunteer swimmers in New York, 1931. The raft's hinged wooden frames lock together into a floating ring, designed to store flat and deploy in seconds during emergencies. Australian activist Ian Cohen grips the bow of USS Oldendorf during a harbor protest in Sydney, 1986. The stunt made global headlines, and he later became the first Greens member of New South Wales's Upper House in 1995. On 31 December 1927, a young Lufthansa aviator stands beside the Junkers G-24 Hohentwiel D-1327 before a winter flight. He would later serve as the personal pilot to Germany's ruler in the 1930s and 40s. On the World War II era set of the film Escape to Victory in 1981, Sylvester Stallone, Pelé, and Michael Caine line up for a staged match beside extras in German uniforms. Stallone dropped about 40 pounds for the role and later said playing football was tougher than the ring work in Rocky. Sinbad, the United States Coast Guard's beloved mascot, rides a sousaphone during a morale show in 1946. Serving aboard the cutter Campbell, he even had a service record and Liberty card. Minutes before his Wembley show on July 16, 1988, Michael Jackson presented a $450,000 check to the Prince's Trust to support Great Ormond Street Hospital. The gift came during his sold-out Bad World tour dates in London. Thousands of women and children formed a living American flag on the steps of the United States Capitol in 1929 when the 48-star banner was in use. This carefully staged pageant captured months before the stock market crash. In 1962, shop owners from Manhattan's Radio Row staged coffin-themed protests against the Port Authority's plan to clear their blocks for the future World Trade Center, warning that eminent domain would bury small business. At 5:20 in the morning on 7 March 1955, Los Angeles saw a second sunrise when the flash from a Nevada nuclear test lit the city like daylight. It was the Operation Teapot Turk shot roughly 400 kilometers away. A Dutch family shelters on their own roof during the North Sea flood of 1953, when a night storm surge broke dikes at hundreds of points and turned farms into islands. About 70,000 people had to evacuate, pushing the Netherlands to start the Delta Works, a massive flood defense system. New York, June 2, 1949. George Brownsdorf, 6 feet 4, and Joe Damone, 5 feet 1, demo the novelty double ender pipe built for 2 users at once. The maker sold it as a way to save material and to share easily during a ball game. 1933, Dessau Arjun Dangar shows a record mustache measuring 198 centimeters, braided to keep it clean and strong. The Indian showman toured ocean liners and fairs, turning grooming into a headline act. Autumn 1962. A Yellowstone ranger draws a bow fitted with a tranquilizer dart, a common tool before modern dart guns. The aim was calm capture and relocation of food-seeking bears away from campsites. Bergen, 1953. An escaped polar bear is carefully winched from the harbor as crowds pack the quay to watch the rescue. At the time, Arctic animals were often transported for zoos and shows, so teams used cranes, ropes, and a floating crate to secure the bear without harm. Lieutenant Elton Fraser somehow brought his shredded F-4U Corsair home, landing safely despite a torn wing, ripped tail, and a holed fuselage, proof of nerves of steel and flawless airmanship. The rugged Corsair, with its inverted gull wing and R-2800 radial, was famed for surviving extreme damage. A giant billboard by the Arc de Triomphe invites Parisians to an exhibition titled Bolshevism Against Europe at Salle Wagram, 39 Avenue de Wagram. Taken during the wartime occupation, it shows how central Paris streets became stages for heavy messaging on the Champs-Élysées. Sea survival drill for Soyuz 28. Commander Alexei Gubrev peers from the floating descent module as Czech pilot Vladimir Remek practices open water egress in 1978. Weeks later, they launched on Intercosmos, making Remek the first human in space from outside the United States and the Soviet Union. A U.S. Air Force C-5 Galaxy landed in Moscow on February 10, 1992, carrying humanitarian supplies during Russia's first post-Soviet winter. The giant airlifter, able to haul over 120 tons. U.S. troops watch Mount Vesuvius erupt on March 24, 1944, its ash column rising about 5 miles and blanketing Naples and nearby towns. The blast showered the Pompeii airfield, damaging or destroying more than 80 Allied planes. On September 28, 1968, Czech adventurer Jaromír Wagner rode from West Germany to New York while strapped to the roof of a Britten-Norman BN-2 Islander on a special platform. The small twins' short range meant a marathon of about 50 hours. Soviet radio engineer A. Rikech and his daughter Natasha tune in at home to the famous beep beep of Sputnik Moscow, October 10, 1957. Millions worldwide could catch the new satellite on simple shortwave sets at about 20.005 and 40.002 megahertz. French Army Mobile Shop on the Somme, October 15, 1916. An entire grocery on wheels stocked with sausages, bread, chocolate, tobacco, and canned rations for tired poilus. These rolling stores followed units near the rear areas. Titanic Fourth Officer Joseph Boxhall, a survivor, watches a preview of the film A Night to Remember in 1958. He served as the movie's technical advisor, the same man who sent distress rockets and helped launch lifeboats. Panasonic's flip-and-style foldable hairdryer, featured in Teen magazine in 1972, pitched travel-friendly design with a wink. Early 70s ads leaned on playful humor to sell new portable gadgets, and this compact dryer became a quirky icon of that trend. Survivors row clear as the stern rises and the giant propeller looms, an eerie hallmark of World War I sea disasters. In 1917, Germany's unrestricted submarine campaign sank over 6 million tons of Allied shipping, prompting the convoy system that finally blunted the threat. Tsarevich Alexei. Nikolaevich undergoes a therapeutic mud bath at a Crimean spa in 1913, a favored treatment in the Romanov court. The healing sake mud was used to ease the young heir's chronic joint pain from a hereditary bleeding condition. A Londoner peers through a cardboard periscope to catch the coronation procession of King George VI in 1937. Street vendors sold thousands of these pocket viewers so spectators, among an estimated 2.5 million along the 8-mile route, could see above the crowd. AB-17 releases its payload as it falls past the nose of a pursuing Focke-Wulf 190, 1944. In crowded bomber routes over Europe, tight timing meant fighters sometimes flew into falling bombs. Fidel Castro lifts the National Liberation Front flag during his September 1973 visit to Quang Tri, Vietnam. He was the first foreign head of government to enter the newly liberated zone, promising major aid and sending Cuban engineers to help rebuild roads and a hospital. U.S. Chief Game Warden George A. Lawyer displays a confiscated punt gun, a 250-pound market hunting giant once mounted on small boats to take many birds at once, 1920. Early conservation laws soon restricted these oversized shotguns. Edwin Hubble inside the 200-inch Hale telescope at Palomar Observatory, the giant that achieved first light in 1949. For years, the world's largest optical telescope, it powered measurements that cemented Hubble's expanding universe work and mapped countless galaxies. An Allied recon plane captured German crews filling Omaha Beach with obstacles, steel hedgehogs and mined stakes nicknamed Rommel's asparagus. Taken on 2 April 1944, about 2 months before D-Day. A model showcases Guy Laroche's Telstar dress during an in-flight fashion show aboard a DC-6 cruising at 6,000 meters between Paris and Geneva in November 1962. Named after the new communication satellite launched that year, Marilyn Monroe leans into the new three-dimensional craze in 1953, peeking through cardboard glasses while flipping a program. That year, Hollywood's first big three-dimensional boom. Valya and Tolya Shavatev pack small sandbags in July 1941, a backyard drill to smother incendiary devices during air raids. Across the Soviet home front, teens joined civil defense units and learned to quench magnesium fires with sand and shovels. At the Jack Daniels distillery stands the safe that killed Jack, the vault the founder allegedly kicked in frustration when it wouldn't open. He hurt his toe, complications followed, and the mishap ultimately cost him his life, turning this battered safe into whiskey lore. Former U.S. President Richard Nixon chats with a smiling vendor at a Moscow market on March 22, 1991. His post-presidency visit captured a moment when the Soviet economy was edging toward market reforms and unlikely bridge building. Sir Hiram Maxim, famed engineer, also marketed this pipe of peace, a menthol vapor inhaler sold in the early 1900s to ease asthma and persistent coughs. Users warm the glass bulbs to release soothing vapors. On VE Day, Private First Class Clarence Ayers reads the headline to German prisoners on a New York pier, May 8, 1945. Moments earlier, Europe learned the fighting was over, and the news reached these POWs from an American holding a paper that said it all. Engineers pose with the gadget on its transporter at the Trinity site, New Mexico, 16 July 1945. The device for the world's first nuclear test. The plutonium implosion design produced about 21 kilotons and proved the concept used in later designs. British forces burned the wooden barracks of Bergen-Belsen in June 1945 to stop a fast-spreading typhus epidemic and decontaminate the site after liberation. The buildings were destroyed only after survivors were moved to a nearby displaced persons camp for care and recovery. A Tu-95 releases the Tsar Bomba test device over Novaya Zemlya on 30 October 1961, with a parachute slowing the drop so the crew could reach a safe distance. With an estimated yield of about 50 to 57 megatons, it remains the most powerful human-made blast ever recorded. Princess Diana presents awards to surf lifesavers on a Sydney beach during the 1988 Royal Tour, marking Australia's bicentenary. Her relaxed, crowd-friendly visits with surf clubs turned the life-saving movement into a national showcase that year. Elvis Presley performs in Oklahoma City in 1970 as a sea of binoculars makes the crowd look like hundreds of glowing eyes. He joked that the binocular users looked like frogs, a playful snapshot of his comeback tour peak. Berlin police survey the gutted chamber beneath the shattered dome after the Reichstag fire of 27 February 1933. The blaze became the trigger for sweeping emergency powers and the enabling act, dismantling Germany's democracy within weeks. Inside an American tank at a test site in Nevada, crew members are preparing for a blinding flash just 5 kilometers from the site of a 29-kiloton explosion on May 5, 1955, during Operation Q. Brooklyn, winter 1980. After crews put out a hotel blaze, Jose spray flash froze in the bitter wind and sealed the street in ice. Engines, trees, hydrants, and ladders turned into eerie ice sculptures, a cold weather hazard that adds tons of weight and can freeze equipment solid. A British soldier in German East Africa, 1916, stitched a Christmas card onto a torn scrap of khaki, mail from a front where paper and comforts were rarer than rain. Toronto, October 1954. A resident paddles to a hand pump to collect drinking water after Hurricane Hazel turned streets into canals. The storm dumped up to 285 millimeters of rain in 48 hours, spurring major flood control reforms across Ontario. A boy sits in a sea of confetti, holding a headline announcing Germany's surrender in 1945. On VE Day, millions flooded streets from London to New York, turning newspapers and office scraps into spontaneous ticker tape celebrations. Princess Diana tests a breakaway sugar glass bottle on Prince Charles during their visit to Pinewood Studios in 1986. Pinewood, home to many James Bond films, let them try movie props, turning a royal tour into a playful stunt. Soviet troops in Stalingrad turned captured straw-woven German winter footwear into emergency horse fodder. Wartime improvisation at its peak. Those boots were often ersatz guard shoes braided from straw, which made them oddly perfect as feed in a frozen, supply-starved steppe. A U.S. Navy K-ship blimp hovers over German submarine U-858 as it becomes the first U-boat to surrender on the U.S. mainland off Fort Miles, Delaware, on 14 May 1945. The boat had been dispatched to lay mines off America's coast. The WLW Crossley Superpower radio receiver, shown in 1936, packed 37 vacuum tubes and 6 speakers, including 2 12-inch units and a massive 18-inch woofer, pushing an unheard-of 75 watts for home audio. Claudia Cardinale feeds spaghetti to Rome's stray cats beside the Pantheon in 1963, caught between film triumphs like The Leopard and 812. The Pantheon has long housed a cared-for colony of cats tended by volunteers, and pasta feedings were a familiar scene in the square. The Reichstag's plenary chamber stands gutted and skeletal in Berlin, photographed on 28 February 1933. Hours later, the blaze became the pretext for the Reichstag fire decree, erasing civil freedoms and clearing the path to one-party rule. Keepers at the London Zoo laid out what one curious ostrich had swallowed in 1930. Gloves, handkerchiefs, coins, nails, a pencil, and even a roll of fabric. Ostriches gulp stones to grind food, and in captivity they sometimes grab shiny or tough objects instead. At just 20, rising star Taiho Koki lifts the giant Emperor's Cup after a 1960 tournament win. Born Naya Koki to a Japanese mother and a Ukrainian father on Sakhalin, he became one of sumo's greatest yokozuna with a record 45-bout streak. A giant wall thermometer in Amsterdam publicly tracked the running total of traffic accidents in 1949, turning road safety into a daily scoreboard. This early civic data display was meant to nudge safer behavior by making the risk visible to everyone on the street. Workers in full protective gear unload sealed boxes of low-level nuclear waste into a burial trench at Hanford, Washington, 1974. Born from the plutonium production era, Hanford became a cornerstone for modern safety rules and long-term cleanup science. After the Petsamo-Kirkenes offensive in autumn 1944, Soviet troops documented this dismantled German prisoner camp on the Arctic tundra near the Finnish-Norwegian border. Beachgoers are watching how in 1945 on Long Island, a truck bombarded the coastline with DDT, a common post-war mosquito control tactic before its harm to health became widely known. The use of the miracle chemical in the United States was restricted in 1972 after people sparked interest in safer pest control. Payday in 1906. Workers line up at a depot to receive cash wages from the company paymaster. Most people had no bank accounts, so pay came in envelopes of coins and bills. On January 23, 1960, Jacques Picard and U.S. Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh took the bathyscaphe Trieste to the Challenger Deep, reaching about 10,916 meters, 35,114 feet, a first for humanity. Under roughly 1,100 times surface pressure, they stayed around 20 minutes, radioed all well, and returned safely. Charleston Craze, 1926. A dancer jams on a phonograph, and high steps on the raw edge of a rising skyscraper. Publicity so bold it sold out shows by breakfast. In the Jazz Age, rooftop stunts like this were staged without modern safety rules, turning city skylines into free billboards. The photo shows the battered deck of the Russian battleship Oriole after the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, scarred by an estimated 76 to 140 shell hits. German shipyard workers walk inside the ribbed frames of a U-boat's pressure hull in Hamburg during World War II. These submarines were built from prefabricated ring sections that were bolted and then welded. A New Year's Day protest in 1923 shows Americans rolling through Michigan Square with a banner reading, "I'm no camel, I want beer," urging repeal of the 18th Amendment that began prohibition in 1920. The dry era lasted until 1933. At the 1937 Berlin Motor Show, a motorized bicycle prototype with an early hub motor and frame battery drew the attention of top officials. The show paused after 1939 and returned in 1951 as the IAA in Frankfurt, later becoming Europe's flagship car expo. An American B-24 Liberator cuts through towering flak bursts over Italy in 1943, caught by a camera from a nearby plane. With long range and a heavy load, the B-24 powered the 15th Air Force's deep raids from North Africa and Sicily. Soviet state security officers lie prone to speak into the earth, negotiating with underground UPA holdouts sealed in a hidden bunker. In the late 1940s, many such standoffs ended through patient talks via air vents and hatches rather than force. Wehrmacht soldiers practice improvised anti-aircraft fire with an MG-34, tilting the tripod and using a teammate as a counterweight to sweep the sky, 1942. The MG-34's rapid rate of about 800 to 900 rounds per minute let crews shift from ground support to air defense in seconds. John Lennon and Yoko Ono lit up Times Square in 1969 with a giant billboard reading, "War is over, if you want it." Their headline, "Peace Message." They repeated it in 12 cities worldwide and in newspapers and posters. On the hangar deck of USS Yorktown CV-10, sailors gather for a movie while armorers ready ordnance beneath folded wings. Downtime and duty sharing the same space, October to December 1943. The fuselage of the U-2 aircraft was redesigned into an airship nacelle, using an instructor's cockpit, engine, and controls to control the tiny airship on the cheap. In 1951, U.S. aircraft struck a key rail yard in Korea to cut supply lines, captured here as blasts rise beside freight cars from an overhead view. Disrupting trains was a core tactic of the Korean War air campaign. British strongwoman Joan Rhodes bends a steel bar with her teeth during a cabaret act, 1952. Known worldwide as the Mighty Mannequin, she toured stages, bending iron and one hand lifting full-grown men, turning feats of strength into showbiz legend. A shattered Berlin flak tower after post-war demolition, 1949. These air defense fortresses had concrete walls up to 3.5 meters thick, sheltered tens of thousands during raids, and even stored museum treasures, so engineers had to blast them in stages. Dancers from Lefkada balance wooden barrels on their heads during a folk festival in Greece, 1963. The Lefkada International Folklore Festival, launched in 1962, brought groups from many countries and turned the island into a summer stage of music and dance. Ronald Reagan takes a ceremonial swing at the Berlin Wall in 1990, 3 years after his famous 1987 speech that challenged its existence. He visited Berlin just weeks before German reunification. Walt Disney stands with a giant Mickey Mouse outside his Hyperion Avenue studio in Los Angeles in 1931, just 3 years after the character's breakout in Steamboat Willie. By then, Mickey shorts were global hits, and the first waves of merchandise had begun. Doctors deploy a Kamov Ka-18 medevac in the Soviet countryside, a compact coaxial rotor helicopter that needs no tail rotor and can land in tiny clearings. Its sanitary kit carried oxygen gear, removable stretchers, and restraint straps. Chicago cab companies experimented with rooftop TV antennas in 1948 so passengers could watch live shows while riding, an early version of taxi TV. The antenna fed a small backseat screen. British Lieutenant Donald Grantham holds Type M chemical bombs beside a seaplane at Lake Onega in September 1919 during the Allied intervention in the Russian Civil War. Weeks earlier, his squadron staged the first mass air raid on Kronstadt. Aerial view of Panzerzug 76, a German armored train, halted in East Prussia on April 14, 1945. 6 IL-2 planes stopped its final run, leaving a long trail of metal along the track. A street crowd listens to a live concert on a portable radio in Leipzig in 1923. The tall loop antenna pulls in faint waves, turning a box of lamps and coils into public wonder. German Army cameramen record from a trench on the Western Front in 1917. A tall periscope camera lets them capture scenes above the earth while staying low. A rare look at early war reporting. Crowds gather around a giant shark caught near Istanbul in the 1930s. It looks like a basking shark, the second largest fish, yet it lives on tiny plankton. Harry Gardner hangs from the 24th floor of a New York hotel in 1910. Known as the human fly, he climbed tall city walls with no rope and drew huge street crowds. Before a show at the Ardwick Theatre in Manchester on December 7, 1965, the Beatles put on smog masks. The cartoon mouths made a gray problem look funny for a moment. At the 1904 World's Fair, oversized model ships cruised a man-made lagoon with uniformed captains riding inside. These working models, styled like new ocean liners, gave crowds a close look at modern sea travel. 4 days after D-Day, German prisoners stand behind wire on Omaha Beach in Normandy on June 10, 1944. Barrage balloons hang above while landing craft work offshore as the front moves inland. Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia stand in the park of the Alexander Palace in July 1917, their heads shaved after illness. The four sisters smile for a rare calm moment in a year that changed their world. Launch of the first nuclear submarine, USS Nautilus, at Groton, Connecticut on January 21, 1954. Its power plant let it stay underwater for weeks without surfacing, a new era in the deep. Agents Hall seized liquor from a rum runner on a United States shore in 1930. Prohibition lasted from 1920 to 1933. And boats like this moved thousands of bottles at night. Jacob Hudson Nacken, billed as the tallest Santa, gets measured for a new suit in 1949. He stood about 7 feet 3 inches tall, so even the coat had to be custom made. Morning flag raising at a women's labor service camp in Baden, Germany in 1940. The circle drill taught strict order and unity before work, a sign of how states shape daily life. Harry Houdini hangs upside down in his glass water cell in the United States in 1912. He designed this escape himself and could hold his breath for over 3 minutes while the real method stayed secret. During training in 1989, a blast struck a gun turret on the battleship Iowa. It cost 47 lives, yet thick armor and blast doors held, letting 12 crew survive. French soldiers display a life-size papier-mâché cow used as a moving hide on no man's land in France between 1916 and 1918. A scout crawled inside and looked out through a small slot, while the field saw only a quiet cow.